to all of the world. I give you Sarah Borchert, the editor of Africa Geographic.
I'm president. Yes. Okay, great. You can hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, good afternoon everybody, and thank you so much for coming today. I'm amazed to see so many people here. It's so exciting. And it's such an honor to be able to talk to you. The ivory trade, the trade that is decimating our elephants, is a complex beast. It involves poachers, middlemen, traders, smugglers, customs officials, law enforcement, dealers, carvers, retailers, and of course consumers. It's impossible to talk to you all about it today, so I'm going to offer what I hope are insights into the legal trade and its impact on the illegal trade. Yes, although international trade in ivory has been banned since 1989, there have been a few what they call one-off sales of stockpiled ivory. The arguments for these sales, and indeed even a regular, tightly controlled ivory trade, are persuasive. Most recently, they've been best articulated by someone I admire very much. And the general gist is this: elephants die of natural causes. And for decades now, wildlife authorities have collected the tusks from these and stockpiled them. On the other side of the world, in Asia, China mostly, Thailand to a lesser extent. Oh, sorry, is that better? Yeah. Okay. Alright, so I'm giving you the general gist of the pro-trade legal arguments here. Basically, wildlife authorities collect tusks from these and stockpile them. On the other side of the world, Asia, China mostly, Thailand to a lesser extent, there's an ancient and much venerated tradition of ivory carving, and those governments which those governments seem keen to support. It should, argues this writer and a lot of other people, not be beyond human ingenuity to devise a workable, reliable, legal ivory sales system. And the primary reason for doing this isn't to satisfy buying countries, it's to allow African countries an elephant-friendly way to benefit to the tune of millions of dollars from them, and to help defray the steep costs of their conservation. And those costs are real, and the budget constraints that these wildlife departments operate under are ridiculously small. Money's getting tighter and tighter, and they're having to do more anti-poaching work, more maintenance, more research, with much less. It sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? And in a perfect world, maybe it would work. African countries would sell stockpiles from natural elephant mortalities, and Asian countries could make ivory trinkets to sell. But of course we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where corruption, greed, and plain old ignorance can take a reasonable scenario and subvert it completely. Illegal ivory will hide behind legal ivory, and the market, insatiable as it is, will absorb as much ivory as Africans are prepared to slaughter. This isn't something I suspect, or a world-weary view driven by cynicism. It's something I know, and I know because it's happened already. In 2008, Japan and China bought 108 tons of stockpiled ivory from southern African countries. And in accordance with the conditions of that sale, strict regulations were put in place. Only government-approved ivory processing retail outlets could engage in the trade. These had to be licensed, and the ivory they carved for sale needed to carry registration cards. But in 2001, when the International Fund for Animal Welfare conducted an investigation, they found twice as many unlicensed ivory dealers as there were licensed ones, and a vast majority of the ivory pieces for sale either didn't have the cards, or they were using ones that had been used previously. Even more worrying, Wild Aid, a charity that focuses specifically on reducing demand in consumer countries, conducted a survey earlier this year in 3 of China's main cities, and found that half the residents didn't know there was a poaching problem. Half had no idea how to distinguish legal from illegal ivory, and half of them thought that it all came from elephants who died naturally. And that's if they even knew that elephants do have to die for ivory to be harvested. Still, another study found that many Asian consumers don't know that ivory comes from dead elephants. And before we fall into that terrible and fruitless trap of blaming China, please bear in mind that in Thailand, which accounts for maybe a quarter of ivory consumption, it is Western tourists, Australians, Americans and Brits who buy ivory trinkets to take back home. So we have a situation where a small amount of legal ivory injected into the market has provided the means to hide a much larger illegal trade. whose products are being supplied to consumers who, through ignorance, deliberate misinformation, or because they simply don't care, are in no position to question the origin of what they're buying. So how can supplying more ivory legally into that system contain the illegal trade? The answer is that it can't, and it won't. The only course of action we have is to make it as hard as possible to get ivory. So that's every anti-poaching measure you can think of, and to ensure that any ivory that hits the streets is illegal. And then we throw everything we have at strengthening and enforcing the laws that make it illegal, while at the same time turning the tide of public opinion away from the notion that acquiring and desiring ivory is socially acceptable. Knowing that it is illegal, and even knowing there are severe penalties for doing it, isn't enough. Human beings do what they think they can get away with. And the more people that they see with ivory, the more they think, I know it's wrong, but everyone else is doing it and getting away with it, so why not me? So we increase the probability of getting caught, and that means treating wildlife crimes seriously, and help to create a social environment where buying, owning, and giving ivory is socially unacceptable. It has happened in a large degree to the West and in Japan, so don't tell me we can't change people's attitudes. Attitudes change all the time. When I was a student, driving when you were drunk wasn't just acceptable, it was practically encouraged. Car seats, children's car seats were non-existent when I was little. Now we all use them, or we should. And how many of you recycled anything 5 years ago? And now? History is littered with barely remembered practices and trends that were considered non-negotiable or impossible to change at the time.
Yeah. Nearly done, don't worry.
And when we talk about we, I mean everyone along the ivory supply chain. We need to work with African governments and law enforcement, customs officials, Interpol, and most especially the governments and citizens of the nations where ivory is consumed. We need to persuade them somehow that elephants are not there simply to supply us with a substance that, when all is said and done, simply looks pretty and makes the person who owns it feel important. Elephants have a right to exist on this earth just as much as we do. So everyone needs to do this, not because of money, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
I'd like to end with a quote from the late, great John Lawrence Anthony, who probably summed it up best when he wrote in The Elephant Whisperer. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned is that there are no walls between humans and the elephants except those we put up ourselves. And that until we allow not only elephants, but all living creatures their place in the sun, we can never be whole ourselves. So let's keep elephants where they belong, in the wild, in the sun, and whole. Let's say no to the ivory trade.
Yay!